I guess with the War Map Act, Ariely, Jimmy, and I, for much more significant and popular acts, Shakira, and maybe even Sarah later. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, as the introduction suggested, micro solutions for facing tomorrow, or the perfect tomorrow. It's a little bit pretentious, I think. I have some involvement with the World Economic Forum, and I think it's somewhat pretentious to believe that you can stand here or sit in the audience and within 10 or 15 minutes solve some of the major issues that we face throughout the world. I was tempted when I was given the brief by the President to talk about some of the issues facing Israel. As I'm in the communications industry, and I have to correct what's in the program, it quotes WPP as being wire and plastic products. Well, we were a small engineering company 25 years ago when we started, but today we have about 145,000 people in 106 countries throughout the world involved in advertising, media, public relations, branding, and the like. And when I look at some of the issues that the government faces here in Israel and indeed abroad, I think about maybe how we'd like to position Israel, what the perceptions of Israel we would like to be. But when we think about that problem, and we were talking about this yesterday when I arrived here, it's really not an issue, just to make an observation on it, it's not an issue about the brand attributes, what they are and what they should be. It's more a structural thing. In dealing with many governments that we've worked with throughout the world, the critical issue is really getting the government, the president, the prime minister, the minister of tourism, investment and trade ministers to work in a cohesive way. And we see that some of our agencies have been working with the Israeli government and ambassadors abroad, and we see that in the context of Israel. Well, I didn't want to talk about that. I noticed in the program that the President Perez, said that what was going on in the Middle East was typical or emblematic of what he called the Facebook revolution. With all due respect, I don't think it is a Facebook revolution. What Facebook represents, and I'm sure Jimmy will talk about this as well, what Google represents, what Twitter represents, and whatever else comes down the road is an acceleration, a catalyst for what's happening. It doesn't solve or create the fundamental causes. The fundamental causes, in the case of North Africa, or cases of North Africa and the Middle East, are high food prices, high unemployment, and particularly higher unemployment amongst the youth. So I didn't want to talk about that. I didn't want to talk about the 5 issues that we face, our clients face, and the industry faces around the world. The first issue, obviously, particularly at this moment in time, is Euro contagion. The issues facing Greece or Portugal or Ireland or indeed Spain, and how they might spread around Europe. The issues that face the United States as the administration steadfastly refuses, partly because of deadlock between Republicans and Democrats, to deal with the deficit issues. These issues will come home to roost either before the general election in 2012 or shortly thereafter. Or the other issue of high commodity prices, input prices, that are causing big issues for producers. And you see here in Israel, I didn't know about the cottage cheese crisis before I got here, but I certainly saw it when I landed yesterday. And then the last 2 issues of the 5, the first being the terrible events in Japan, not so much in the context of the Japanese economy and its impact, but the supply chain difficulties that it gives everybody else. And last, the 5th problem, and the 5th issue, which I think is the most fundamental and most difficult to deal with, is the events that are taking place as we speak not only in North Africa, but in the Middle East too. As someone who has visited Israel many times, my first visit to the Peres conference, to the Peres Foundation's conference, this is the issue that causes the greatest amount of uncertainty. The people that run our businesses in the Middle East, we have 4 major businesses in the Middle East in advertising and media, tell me long term it's good. More democracy, more free enterprise, more private sector, more freedom, more opportunity, entrepreneurial opportunity. But in the short term, it's going to be quite bumpy. That's what I worry about. And this increasing uncertainty, I think, of the 5 issues that I've mentioned, certainly in the short term, that give us the most problems. Now, I didn't want to talk about that either. What I wanted to talk about was my experience in dealing, and it's a Chinese example that I start with. I've been on the committee of Mayor Han. Mayor Han has been the mayor of Shanghai for many years, for 5 or 6 years that I've been on the committee. And the mayor of Shanghai has asked business leaders, 50 or so of them, every year to come to Shanghai to discuss an issue that the mayor thought was important. Might be environment, might be sustainability, might be education, might be technology. And we sit and, as you would think from the Chinese, or you would expect from the Chinese, these issues are well thought through, the presentations are carefully done, translated into Chinese, rarely for government bureaucrats, and I mean that in a kind sense, not a harsh sense. They actually listen and they actually learn. And unashamedly, we took that concept of the Mayor's Committee with leading business leaders from around the world, and we took it to Ken Livingstone and Boris Johnson, his successor in London, and we're doing it in London. We took it to Mayor Alemanno in Rome as he bids for the Olympic Games, and we're doing the same. And it looks like we will do the same thing here in Jerusalem with the Mayor of Jerusalem in time. I hope that will be an initiative that takes place. Now, I mention that because there is one statistic that I think, or set of statistics, that you really should think about. Today, 50% of the world's population, out of about 6.5 billion, live in cities. By the year 2050, 70% of the world's population, which is predicted by then to be about 8.9 billion, will be living in cities. If you were an astronaut, if you were on that last shuttle flight, looking at the globe, you would be able to see 450 points of light. And a point of light on the planet, I am told by those who've seen it, that point of light represents more than 1 million people in cities around the world. There are about 184 cities, I think it is, in China, over 1 million people. So a lot of those points of light are concentrated in the landmass of China. But the point is this, is that management of cities, and we've done a lot of work with a number of our agencies, particularly with IBM, on this, and it generated into what we call the smarter planet, and then zeroing in, drilling down to smarter cities. A lot of the work that we're doing with that client, and indeed others, is focusing on the issues that face city governments. Because in the so-called richer, more mature, developed countries, in 2050, about 86% of the population will be in those cities. And in the poorer countries, the faster growing markets, it'll be about 67%, 2/3 are in cities. So managing cities is critically important. Now, if I look at it from a business point of view, one of the trends that we see amongst corporations is certainly a move to greater global coordination, greater control at the center, and integration, certainly in communications. The other thing we see, very interestingly, is a greater focus on local, on country activities too. So you've got the regional structures being squeezed, and it seems to me that there's a parallel or parable for what's happening globally, and that governments can deal with, and what's happening locally, which is what cities can deal with, that mayors can deal with at a local level in an increasing way. So when one looks at it, thinking about something like 70% of the world's population in cities, there are some issues, there are very common issues. It's really like apple pie and motherhood for every mayor, every governor of a city or a city-state. The issues are exactly the same. We heard Shakira talk eloquently about the role of education in the first plenary session with President Perez. Education is front and center, one of the areas. Another area is infrastructure. It can be hard infrastructure, roads, railways, etc. It can be soft infrastructure, such as broadband. You're blessed in Israel with big broadband access, but that's not a blessing that other countries have to the degree that they should have, and that is in the context of technology as well. So the areas that clearly city governments have to work on are education, infrastructure, and technology. And there are four broad areas or trends that they have to deal with. The first is innovation. They have to think about innovation in dealing with aging infrastructures, particularly in the cities, in the old cities, the legacy cities, a city like Jerusalem, or indeed Tel Aviv, newer, but same issues, or London, or Paris, or New York, or Washington, or Madrid, or Frankfurt, or wherever. It's one issue. The second issue is investment. How do you deal with investment in cities when you have declining budgets, when the pressures are on in terms of balancing revenue and costs? The third area is how do you deal with increasingly complex communities when changing populations? Imagine the influx of rural populations that we're seeing not only in China and India, but in other parts of the world. And last of all, the area of sustainability, where increasingly there are threats to how we deal with a sustainable environment. So if you start with 6.5 billion people now, and we have sustainability issues, imagine what the world is going to be like by 2050, when we will have 8.9 billion people on the planet. What we have to do is create smarter cities, a smarter planet, and we have to make sure that we are doing more with less. And some of the challenges we face in business are certainly applicable. What mayors have to do, what governors have to do is to use information, they have to anticipate problems, and they have to coordinate resources. So the sort of things that they're starting to play with are areas such as smart metering in the context of how cities analyze their energy problems, smarter analysis of statistics on crime, on predicting floods. It seems that the world is threatened increasingly with earthquake, floods, and the implication of that. Smarter train networks, looking at academic achievement by schools and universities in the context of cities, looking at how airports are run or not run. One of the biggest issues that Rio de Janeiro faces in the context of the Olympic Games and the World Cup is transportation and how its airports will be able to cope with it. And in that context, also traffic systems and energy systems and how direct access to grids by consumers can sometimes ease peak loads. So, for example, I mentioned Rio. Some of the things they're looking at is how they can prevent and avoid deaths from flooding and landslides, how they can develop better emergency responses, analyze weather trends, and last but not least, look at that in the context of the two major events that are going to happen in 2014 and 16, the World Cup and the Olympics. This is, in our view, we do a lot of work with, Shakira comes from Colombia, we do a lot of work with Luis Moreno at the IADB, the second largest aid institution in the world, and we both believe that this is the decade of Latin America in this coming decade, largely as a result of those two events. So finally, we have to focus on the strategy of cities. We have to look at how health, education, social services, transportation, energy and water and public safety interlink and develop a strategy. And beyond those general areas, to institutions that we have to manage, like hospitals, universities, non-profit NGO institutions, businesses, utilities, and last but not least, and most importantly, citizens that work in the cities. So these areas are the areas that we're increasingly going to focus on. And whilst we talk about philosophical changes and strategic changes at a macro level, what I think is really important to gain traction is to really look at the firm, in a sense, the micro level, in government terms, to look at how cities manage their resources in a more effective way. And in that way, we will have not only smarter cities, but a smarter planet. Thank you very much.